We have McKinsey again, a business and tech correspondent from CNBC. We have Ayush Chopra, PhD student from MIT. Of course, we have Dave Blondin, managing partner at Link Ventures, and we have Mike Casey. So you want to sit in the middle? So it's going to be tight.
Okay. Yeah. Sure. So that's only help out. About that.
We did. Try.
Test, test, test. All right, here we go. Hey guys, I am Mac and I am a tech reporter at CNBC. Today we're talking about something that I think will help define the next decade, the rise of agentic systems and how AI agents will help reshape the $9.4 trillion labor market. Now, MIT researchers have combined two major breakthroughs here. The NANDA registry, which you can essentially think of as a real-time census of AI agents, and then large population models capable of simulating entire economies. Together, this technology powers something called Project Iceberg, which is a new framework that gives governments and enterprises unprecedented visibility into how automation will spread across industries, identifying both the risks and, crucially, the opportunities in this new agentic economy. So to kick us off, Ayush, please explain to us what Project Iceberg is and how exactly you're using these millions of AI agents to simulate the labor market.
Hi. Yeah, so we've been working on Nanda for a while, and it's great to have you guys at the launch. So as we were building Nanda and talking to people about it, a question that would come back again and again is what does it mean for me? It's as an individual, how is Nanda going to affect my life? Soon we'll have these specialized agents that can do tasks on my behalf. So how does it affect sort of my place in the workplace? And there's some skepticism, some enthusiasm. So with Project Iceberg, what we thought is, can we come up with a way to quantify this transformation? And we do this through something called the Iceberg Index, which essentially tries to track that as the agentic workforce is growing across the economy and the Nanda Internet of Agents gets built, if you could understand how these agents are sort of spreading out and these agent capabilities are rippling out across the entire labor force, essentially, economic value, skills, workforce, and figuring out what part of the economy is obviously being impacted, things like content creators, software developers, designers, which is obvious, but there are a lot of these other parts of the economy which may seem non-obvious, but can actually benefit or be transformed with AI. So hence the iceberg. We're trying to figure out what lies beneath the surface.
And so let's talk about that second category that you're describing. What surprised you most so far about the way that automation might spread, and which jobs are most at risk that you might not expect?
Interesting. So what surprised me most is so the US Census has a very formal way of looking at the labor market. It's 163 million jobs, 32,000 skills, 923 occupations. So what you'll realize is that a lot of these occupations have varying levels of technology intensity. So there are a lot of jobs which are dominated by can be done repetitively, automatively, but there are a lot of these other jobs where there is relatively non-obvious or less technology intensity, but it drives a significant proportion of the dollar value of the job, legal assistants. They may not spend a major chunk of their time doing paperwork. It seems it's a legal process, but a major significant of their dollar value comes from that. So there is a lot of potential to figuring out these automation gaps, or also trying to figure out could we potentially build a hyperlink for human skills, trying to figure out what are some minimum edits or reskillings that we can do for people so that we can transform the labor market from what it is today to what it should be in the future with minimum friction.
Now, Michael, you're coming at this from a decentralization lens. As we move toward an internet of agents, what's the risk that power becomes even more concentrated, owned by a handful of companies running these agents? And critically, how do we prevent that?
Yeah, right. So Michael Casey, I'm the chairman of the Decentralized AI Society, and the society was really formed because that is precisely the problem that we worry about, that as we move into this AI economy age, that ultimately we're going to have so much financial, economic, and political power concentrated in a very small number of entities. And I think one way to think about the concerns about this as it relates to the work that Ayush and others are doing is the way in which UBI is sometimes framed, right? Universal basic income. And I think if we were to conceive of that as the way in which human beings are going to sort of go on with their lives in the AI age, it's not necessarily bad that we have a safety net idea. I think that's a healthy concept. But the degree to which it's framed within the idea that an enormous amount of power is concentrated in the hands of a small group of entities, then essentially we're creating a feudalist system, right? Because we're delivering the data, we're delivering the benefits. We are still the critical part of what that economy is. But all we are doing is getting this menial income without any sense of agency of what the human being is, right? So part of it is making sure that AI agent economy is not heavily concentrated, but another critical piece of it is building data structures around human beings and who they are as they stand, so that as we enter into the AI economy, a human is able to say, I'm valuable. And an AI is able to go, yes, you are. I need that data. So we need to, it's about decentralizing the economy at the top, but also empowering human beings to be able to negotiate on their own terms in a way that's meaningful and powerful, rather than sort of being a feudal serf in the system.
We'll come to back to that point in just a minute. But first, Dave, I want to hear from you. You run an accelerator called Link Ventures. So you're seeing a lot of this dynamic play out in real time.
Yeah.
Talk to me about some examples that kind of illuminate what we're chatting about here in theory.
Funny, because we were talking on the side here. We have one investment in a company called Mercor, which has a $2 billion valuation, 21-year-old CEO.
Must be
and
nice.
So certainly nice. But I've been talking to the governor a fair amount and saying, look, are we ready for a world of 21-year-old billionaires and then simultaneously massive amounts of white-collar job displacement? And our governor here is particularly brilliant, but government in general is not ready. So Maura Healey is thinking about it more than any other governor that I know of, but the organization is just not ready for the rate of change that's inevitable. But in the past, when we think about job displacement, we're thinking about blue-collar work, we're thinking about automation of physical stuff. Here we're talking about like pretty much everyone all these white-collar jobs getting completely turned upside down in about 18 to 24 months. And meanwhile, there's a 21-year-old billionaire walking around your neighborhood. Like, just think through the amount of mind-blowing change and then there's no preparation going on right now for it. So I think all of this is going to end up bouncing back to places like MIT, like basically the building you're in right now, because there's no preparation going on out there. The people who are capable of thinking about it and see it coming are Mark Ornberg, the chairman here at MIT, Daniela Ruz, who runs CSAIL here at MIT. They're not doing it yet because the panic hasn't started yet, but it's inevitably going to come back to them very soon.
Now, Ayush, to Michael's point from before, it's not, yes, there's robots replacing jobs, but then there's also new forms of collaboration between human workers and agents. So from your research, what does that look like in practice?
Yeah, so what we've spent the last 4 years actually perfecting at MIT is this concept of large population models. So you've probably heard of like large language models, and you think of them as a way to build like sophisticated individual agents. But what we've tried to build is like this platform which allows you to not simulate to 1 or 100 or 1,000, but like millions of individual agents and capturing the effects of their interactions and complexities. So we work with like a lot of governments around the world to help sort of physical nations and like human populations deal with crises. So for like right now, like our tools are used by the government of New Zealand to design like immunization campaigns against measles. We help a lot of Fortune 500 companies manage like billions of dollars of supply chain infra against disruptions. Yeah. So like similarly, we imagine that as like, you could think of like the introduction of like agentic capabilities into the population as sort of creating like this kind of like a hyper graph between like humans, workplaces, skills, interfacing with this new kind of an entity. And then like, we sort of think of like Project Iceberg and our research as sort of like the control panel or like the orchestration layer to ensure that we sort of design it in a seamless manner.
And to Dave's point, I mean, are you actively working to engage with lawmakers to try to get ahead of this?
Yeah, so in the US, we're working with like a couple of governors. We're working with like a few treasury departments around the world in different countries. And with a few, it's not just for like governments, it's also for enterprises. Like technically, like most big companies today are like a digital nation essentially, like pretty much a nation state. So like we're trying to get to like, ideally, like our hope is that the Iceberg index is like a KPI on every CXO's dashboard saying, here is what the automation scale in my enterprise is today.
So if we get this right, and we only have 2 minutes left, this was a very quick panel. Sure. But if we get this right, if we design this next labor market thoughtfully, what's the best case scenario here from your research, from what you're seeing in real time, from your decentralization lens, over the next 5 to 10 years? And what's the one thing that we have to get right today to avoid the worst case risks?
Yeah, good question. I mean, the upside is that the amount of abundance, the amount of value that can be created skyrockets. So there's money to go around, and there's prosperity to go around. Without a plan, it will land exactly the way that you described it. It's going to end up in a few hands, a very few hands. They're just exactly what you're thinking. The preparations for it are near zero. I can guarantee that. We have a couple of investments in companies that these large population simulations are unbelievably effective.
Yeah.
It's an incredible tool. All the customers are marketing departments. None of the governments they're interested and they're listening, but they haven't actually started yet.
Yeah.
And the marketing departments are buying everything that moves because it's so good at predicting who will do what and who will buy what. But it's also perfectly good at predicting the outcome of this revolution.
Yeah.
We just haven't turned it on.
You have to align the profit part of it to the solution part of it, right? So that there's an incentive to do that for the same reason. Look, I think that, I think ultimately to love this idea of having a map and a strategy for moving forward. But I think in answer to your question, as I would see it, Mackenzie, what is the sort of ideal future? It's somewhere where there is a decentralized economy of innovation, multi-agent, and so that we get the best that we always get from multi-stakeholder participation, but also there's a kind of a consensus and a governance model that's associated with it, so that the best decisions actually come down to, let's call it a democracy or a market system, right? So that we're not layering all of this sort of modeling in the hands of these very small groups. At the same time, that has to come and be intersecting with this idea of the human being as an empowered, self-sovereign source of bargaining power within that structure. And so does that look like, is it in the individual? Is it data collectives? Is it data DAO, like the things that Varna have got going? These kind of concepts, I think, interface with that multi-agent world. And that's sort of what I envisage in a very loose way is the sort of the ideal future.
Ayush, bring us home real quick.
So pretty much if we want to build Nanda as the Internet of Agents, and we think of Iceberg as the control plane as you sort of build the Internet of Agents for governments, enterprises around the world.
Great. Thank you so much to our panelists and to everyone who joined us today. Thank you.